Today, we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday edition here of Point of View. It's going to be a very good week. I'm looking forward to a number of the various interviews we'll be doing this week. Most importantly, I hope you'll stay with us as we focus on a number of things today and all through the week. In the next hour, we have Sarah Bauer Anderson on, and we'll be talking about her book, The Space Between Us, and the conflict that comes up so often during an election year, even when it isn't an election year, between people that have very different philosophical, political, and worldview issues. So we'll try to talk about that a little bit. And then also in the next hour after that, actually the last half hour, we'll be talking with Shelby Abbott about his book, Doubtless. And that gets into the whole question of doubt and how to respond as a Christian to those. But in the next hour, I thought I would go through a number of things. First of all, we've got a very good study that has come out looking at the issue of the pandemic. Matter of fact, this is a good preview for the one conversation we'll be having with Jay Richards later in the week, because we'll be talking about the fact that some of the deaths, matter of fact, a very high percentage of the deaths were not due to the coronavirus. They were due to the lockdown as a response to the coronavirus. And he'll be even talking about the fact that this whole idea of a lockdown came from a teenage signage project, and maybe we have recognized it didn't always do what it was supposed to do. But anyway, we'll talk about this because the best estimates are about a third of the so-called excess deaths that took place from March on were not due to the coronavirus. So we'll talk about that. We also, of course, have been following and will continue to follow the response to this blockbuster series of reports. On Wednesday it was one, then Thursday was another one. Pretty soon it's a whole series of ones from the New York Post about the reaction to and the investigation of Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and the response and reaction from the media. So, again, we have some comments by some of the editors of the New York Post about that. The broader issue, of course, is big tech. Rachel Alexander has a very good piece on how big tech is working to have an disproportionate influence on the presidential election from evidence of what they did the last time they had that opportunity, and we've learned a little bit more as well. We'll get into a couple of other issues, but also thought some of you were saying, well, if President Trump is reelected, and that is a long shot, but if he is, what's he going to do? He's done everything. No, not hardly. Back in August, the Trump campaign actually released its second-term agenda. I never saw a news story on it. Found this on Facebook, looked it up and said, okay, I'll give partial credit to the Los Angeles Times that covered it. Partial credit, matter of fact, full credit maybe to Vox that actually included the entire list. But I think it tells you a lot about the fact that it really wasn't even seriously covered by the media. One, because I think it's fair to say they don't necessarily like Donald Trump. Number two, they probably didn't think and still don't think he's going to win, so why bother even putting an article out about what would be the second-term agenda for Donald Trump? Third, I think you might even honestly say that they believe that political promises don't mean anything. You've heard me say before that one of the classic statements, which I found out goes back centuries, is that political promises are like crusts on pies meant to be broken. And then also, I think there may be another reason why they didn't want to maybe cover the short-term agenda and the second-term agenda for Donald Trump, because Joe Biden didn't put one out. Pretty simple. And since Joe Biden hasn't put out a list of who he would have on the federal judiciary. They sort of ignored that list by Donald Trump. And just think about this as well. If indeed Donald Trump says, here's my second-term agenda, and then Joe Biden doesn't put it out, well, then that doesn't look good. So there's just probably a lot of good reasons why it wasn't covered. But let's get back to the first point. We won't spend a lot of time today talking about the pandemic, the coronavirus, and everything else, but I will encourage you to listen to the interview we're going to do with Jay Richards, who, along with a number of other people, wrote a book about, if you will, some of the lessons we've learned from this. But a new study that came out found that maybe a third of all the excess deaths in the United States during the COVID-19 pandemic could not be attributed to the coronavirus. And this is a study, in case you might say, well, who did this? Well, a pretty prestigious scientist who published this in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Now, since it's on the Journal of American Medical Association website, well, maybe some of the press won't cover it. Maybe you'll still have it blocked by some of the social media because it comes to a little different conclusion maybe than the World Health Organization. But these are scientists that have looked at this, and they said although the total U.S. death counts are remarkably consistent from year to year, U.S. deaths increased by about 20% from March to July. Now, COVID-19 was documented as the cause of 67% of that, or two-thirds of those deaths. And so you can come to the other conclusion that you have to sort of do the math and figure it out. That means a third of those excess deaths were not due to the coronavirus. And they went on to say some states had greater difficulty than others in containing community spread, causing protracted elevations and excessive deaths that extended over time. And these excessive deaths, or excess deaths as they call it in the article in the American Medical Association's website, were attributed to causes other than COVID-19. And so these would be all sorts of things that could be affected like this. As we've said before, that could be, cancer screenings that did not take place, other kinds of acute respiratory issues that were quickly diagnosed as COVID-19 but turned out not to be the case, and on and on and on. And it was kind of interesting because then you compare that to an analysis that was done by the Washington Post, in which they also are saying during that same period of time, we had an excess number of deaths from dementia. They might say, how so? Well, here again, directly quoting from that article, beyond the staggering U.S. deaths caused directly by the novel coronavirus, more than 134,200 people have died from Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia since March. That is 13,200 more U.S. deaths caused by dementia than expected compared with previous years. That again, quoting from the Washington Post. Overlooked amid America's war against the coronavirus is the reality that people with dementia are dying not just from the virus, but from the very strategy of isolation that is supposed to protect them. The Washington Post goes on to say, in recent months, doctors have reported increased falls, pulmonary infections, depression, and sudden frailty in patients who have been stable for years. And so, again, just an interesting set of factors that people had not even been paid attention to. Some of them were, okay, we're not getting cancer screenings, we're not getting some social interaction, we're not maybe diagnosing some certain things. But even dementia is now showing up on that as well. In case you're wondering, since we broadcast in Texas, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but there were 10 states that had the highest per capita rate of excess deaths, and those were, no surprise, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, but then a few that were maybe surprising: Louisiana, Arizona, Mississippi, Maryland, Delaware, Rhode Island, and Michigan. But nevertheless, just thought it was a piece that you might like to read in its entirety. It's the first article we've posted, and it is, I think, an indication that as we move through this pandemic, the lockdown, and coming out of the lockdown, at least in some places in the country, we're learning there were some devastating impacts. We'll talk about that later this week, and we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Sometimes presidential debates can be helpful, but the Commission on Presidential Debates is not helpful. I was thinking about this the other day and then came upon a commentary by Newt Gingrich with a similar concern. He persuasively argues that the time has come to recognize how arrogant, biased, and obsolete the Debate Commission has become. The members of the commission decided recently to require a virtual debate with no consultation with the Trump campaign. That effectively killed the next debate. Gingrich asks, what can you expect from the arrogance of a collection of establishment figures averaging 73 years of age? The bias was there long before the recent presidential and vice presidential debates. He mentions the Candy Crowley moment in 2012 in which she injected her comments into the debate against Mitt Romney. There are many other examples, but that one stands out even more than the most recent examples. Consider that the commission picked a registered Democrat, a friendly biographer of Nancy Pelosi, and a Biden intern as the first three moderators. Nearly all of the moderators in the last few election cycles have been Washington insiders and left-of-center members of the media. Here are some suggestions. Let the two candidates agree on a few topics with no moderator. This would resemble the famous Abraham Lincoln-Stephen Douglas debates. Don't think this would work? One idea would be to open the microphone for one candidate for 2 minutes until the microphone goes dead, then open the microphone up for the other candidate. If you think we need a moderator, Hugh Hewitt has a suggestion. Each candidate is allowed to name his or her moderator. Moderators would alternate questions and let the candidate speak for 10 minutes. He concludes, who knows what will happen? A debate might break out. It's time for a better format for these presidential debates. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. I just mentioned a minute ago, we have Jay Richards with us. Dr. Jay Richards has been with us many times before. He is one of the co-authors of a book called The Price of Panic. It will be in the 2 o'clock hour on Wednesday, the 21st. And if you don't have a chance to hear it on your local radio station, you certainly can go online and go to pointofview.net and listen to it, watch it. You can also go to Facebook Live and do so, or if you can't at that 2 o'clock hour even watch it or listen to it, you can go to YouTube and watch it later because it is pretty significant. And so we will get to the issue of the pandemic in the future. Let's get to the story that was kind of the big story last week, and it is the New York Post. New York Post, oldest newspaper in the country, one of the more significant newspapers in the largest city in the country. And yet, nevertheless, when they came out with their blockbuster stories, now it's not just one story because they've had the one on Ukraine on Wednesday, the one on China on Thursday, and they had some since then. There was a desire on the part of the editors of the New York Post to push back a little bit. And if you are saying, what are we pushing back against? Well, it was the decision that when the story came out on Wednesday, first Facebook, then Twitter, basically blocked it. And by blocked it, I meant that if you wanted to take that story and pass it on, they would prevent you from doing it, and then in many cases locked down the particular Twitter account that you have. Now, this was, I think, an illustration of the point I've made for some time about social media. Because when Twitter locks down, for example, the Trump campaign, Twitter locks down the New York Post Twitter account. The Twitter account is locked down for the White House press secretary. I can go through the long list. I'll just use one other one. Senator Ted Cruz, that got his attention because guess who's going to have to testify in front of his committee come Friday? If they can do it against those very powerful people, guess what? They can do it against you. Same argument I've made before. If indeed they can go after the National Security Advisor for the incoming President Donald Trump, they can go after you. If they can go after the president, they can come after you. If they can release the tax returns for the president, they can come after you. So this is why you might say, I don't even like Donald Trump. I don't even care what they do to him. You better care what they might do to you, because that is a game that's getting to be played in a way that most of us, I don't think, saw coming. Well, nevertheless, the editorial board of the Post did have a few things to say about this, and they said much of the push to ignore the New York Post drop of the Hunter Biden's emails centers on the charge that it's all unverifiable, and it's unverified. And I've had a chance now to not only look at the article that was in Mother Jones, which I think might have been the best, although there's now some things that have been in Washington Post and New York Times. And I've also watched the other night Rudy Giuliani do an interview with Mark Levin. So I've gotten into this a little bit more. Don't claim to have an expertise in this at all, but their argument is this claim is more excuse than true. They point that, first of all, and remember this fact, neither Hunter Biden nor Joe Biden nor the Biden campaign have claimed that the hard drive isn't real. So that's the first point. Okay. Then the editors go on to say it's particularly rich that the New York Times has fixated on the unverified excuse, since it spent much of the Trump era offering supposed dirt from anonymous sources, which by definition makes the info what? Unverifiable. So, let's take that where it is. Let's take another example. You got the New York Times, you got the Washington Post. Let's get out of the newspaper business. How about the Atlantic? Do you remember that story that was circulated about Trump calling soldiers suckers and losers? That was what? An anonymous source, wasn't it? Yes, it was an anonymous source, of course. And matter of fact, they were able to come up with almost 24 people that said, no, he didn't say that, and we've never heard him say anything like that. But okay, that is the case. So that's one of the, it's just unverified. The other argument, and I think this is the more compelling argument, if I'm on the other side, I'm going to say, well, what about the chain of evidence? That's a big deal in a criminal court of law. Did I get this particular piece of evidence from the shooting at the scene? Was it then put in a box? Was it then put in the police holding area and then now brought to the trial so I can show the chain of evidence? See what I'm talking about here? And again, the editors of the New York Post have this comment. Now, suddenly, with a trove of information, which again, the Bidens aren't even claiming is false, these same outlets want to ask endless questions about the chain of evidence. And they go on to say, a chain of evidence that the Post has been upfront and open about. And as a matter of fact, if you've watched any of the interviews with Rudy Giuliani, points out that the hard drive was made available to the FBI. They've been sitting on this for some time, and there's a real question why the Justice Department's been sitting on this for a long time, but maybe the words deep state help a little bit with that. And then there were copies made by this individual that had them, 2 given to friends in case he just wound up not being alive any longer. The other day, somebody was asking, well, when you start talking about that, it sounds like a conspiracy. I said, well, look, the best way to respond to that is to say that most conspiracies end because you don't have any evidence. We don't have a Andrew Cuomo body count. We don't have a Barack Obama body count. You don't have a, Mayor Giuliani body count. You don't have a Gavin Newsom body count. But for decades, people have been talking about a Clinton body count. Oh, okay. Maybe you would even have a Biden body count. Oh, well, nevertheless, that would be an interesting thing. But the point is that the chain of evidence is something that people have been able to hold on to. But anyway, back to the point. He gave 2 of the copies from the hard drive to 2 individuals in case he just disappeared. 1 copy was still made available, and Rudy Giuliani picked it up, passed it on to the New York Post after it had been verified in a number of different ways. Won't get into the technical issues, but I thought it was kind of interesting to say that, again, it is possible that this thing is nothing more than just a Russian conspiracy, is the favorite line lately. But again, given all the other unverified ideas and things that were put on the Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts, it is just a little bit, if you will, hypocritical to say that this one needs to actually be prevented from being passed on because it's unverifiable, when the New York Post, I think, has gone the extra mile to actually show that it is. Which brings me to something I'll mention before we take a break, and then we'll talk about, what would a second agenda of a Trump presidency maybe look like? But Rachel Alexander points out this book, and I'm going to go out and buy it because I did not know about this. Alam Bokhari. He's written a book called #Deleted, Big Tech's Battle to Erase the Trump Movement and Steal the Election. Well, anyway, he's worked in this field for some time. And he is actually pointing out the different ways that he has identified big tech as being able to censor, sometimes without even looking like they're censoring. One of his arguments is big tech uses certain buzzwords to justify their censorship. Certain words, if they show up a lot, get claimed. For example, if words like guns or God show up too much in a particular post, they delete it, claiming that it was a bot. And so as a result, that's the case. If words like misinformation, hate speech, fake news, those might be bots, those get eliminated as well. But don't take his word for it. Another individual, Dr. Robert Epstein, a senior research psychologist at the American Institute for Behavioral Research and Technology, and by the way, a Democrat, explained to Congress how Google shifted 2.6 to 10.4 million users to Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election based upon using favored various kinds of stories and things of that nature. By the way, that's a wide range of numbers, but nevertheless, that was one that was actually testified in Congress. Could be wrong, but certainly was kind of interesting. And then pointing out a couple of other things that one of the most scary pieces is that in his book, he talks about the fact that 43% of Americans say they get their news from Facebook. Sleep well, America. 43% get their news from Facebook. Oof. And then goes on to actually talk about Google. He makes the same kind of things statements that you can see in, for example, Netflix, Social Dilemma, and others, in which he says Google is more dangerous than New York Times or CNN, calling it the world's most dangerous company. And, of course, even back in 2018, Google had a document that was leaked called The Good Censor, in which they talk about this. Then it goes into, for example, the financial blacklisting. We've talked about this before, where you got certain platforms like GoFundMe, Kickstarter, and others starting to ban conservatives. And then they even have what's called a defamation engine, where any site from certain sources, one of those would be like Breitbart, that's enough for them to simply ban you because you're not actually using very reputable kinds of stories. And so, if nothing else, one of his quotes is, it comes down to this: either we're going to have freedom or we're going to have a world in which Mark Zuckerberg can render your business unprofitable at a push of a button and decide what kind of voice you have in the public square. We'll be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. About a half an hour, Sarah Bauer Anderson will be with us. The Space Between Us, How Jesus Teaches Us to Live Together When Politics and Religion Pull Us Apart. Again, we'll be talking about this idea of civility and a couple of other issues that I think you will appreciate. Then we'll get back into some of the issues in the news the following hour and finish off with Shelby Abbott talking about the book Doubtless, and I think you will enjoy that as well. Let's, if we can, talk about something that I did not see when it came out. I'm sure there were probably a couple stories, but I did enough of a Google search to say most of the mainstream press pretty much ignored the post that came out by Donald Trump and his campaign about what a second-term agenda might be like. Now, there was a sense in which you already might have said, well, you already have the Democratic convention, you had the Republican convention, you can kind of figure out what that is. You can look at, if nothing else, what is in the platform. Well, the platform for the Republicans is even longer than the one for the Democrats, and a platform is not an agenda. An agenda is a to-do list with high priority, low priority. And if you haven't figured that out in your own life, you better figure it out pretty quickly, because that's the case. And so why didn't the mainstream press generally cover it? I did give some partial credit. I think the Los Angeles Times gave it some credit, Vox, a few others. So, I'm not saying that everybody spiked the story, but they didn't give a lot of it. And part of it, I think, is one of four reasons. Either they don't like Donald Trump, you think. Number two, they didn't think he was going to win, even to this point. In just a minute, I'm going to talk about whether we're going to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission under Joe Biden, because, again, the odds-on favorite are that he's going to win, but we still have to have an election to see that conclusion for sure. I think, as I mentioned before, there's a real skepticism on the part of the press, justifiably so, because how many times have politicians made promises and they didn't keep their promises? And I think you can look back to just the simple promise of moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Bill Clinton didn't. George W. Bush didn't. Barack Obama didn't. You know, each one of them had 8 years in office, and I went to government school, so I hope my math is right. 8 times 3, that's 24 years. That's almost a quarter of a century of promises that were never kept. Donald Trump did. So, again, when Donald Trump makes a promise, he seems to be a lot more dedicated to trying to keep those. And as a matter of fact, I've looked at some of the criticism and said he didn't keep all his promises, about is Mexico going to fund the wall and a few things like that. But after all, you have to say he has hit a batting average better than I've seen in any recent presidency. And then finally, I think they also didn't want to publish it because what's the agenda for Joe Biden? I mean, it's hard to even get Joe Biden to answer the question, or Vice President nominee and Senator Kamala Harris about, are you going to pack the court or not? Are you going to break or encourage people to get rid of the filibuster, all sorts of stuff? And so, nevertheless, with all that as introduction, this is a very long list, and so I won't go into all the details. But first of all, one is, as you might imagine, jobs. Create 10 million new jobs in 10 months. That's the plan. Create 1 million new small businesses, and goes through opportunity zones and a number of others. Number two, eradicate COVID-19. Develop a vaccine by the end of 2020, which is kind of the goal. Return to normal in 2021. Third, which relates to that, end our reliance on China. Bring back 1 million manufacturing jobs from China. And by the way, when you have general principles, you really don't have a strategy. When you have numbers and dates, you have a strategy. And again, whether you like this president or not, whoever put this together, I suspect he was certainly part of this, put down numbers, and maybe if we dig into the details, even put down dates. A couple of top places you actually see dates. That's how you hold somebody accountable. When somebody says, I want to lose weight. Okay. Have we all seen that before? I want to lose 10 pounds by the end of this year. Okay. Now we have a specific amount. We have a specific date. I'll give him credit. He's got that. Okay, healthcare. That was a big issue, and you would think that everybody was actually working against the idea of pre-existing conditions. Here it is, cover all pre-existing conditions, cut prescription drug prices. Of course, he's already done some of that as well. Lower healthcare insurance premiums, end surprise billing. I mean, it goes down for a long, long list, but let me keep going. Education. That one, of course, provides school choice for every child in America, which was one of the big issues in the Republican convention. Then he's got a couple more. Drain the swamp. Gotta love the. I mean, I've never seen this in any other presidential agenda. Past congressional term limits. Well, that's not going to happen. That was something that was being proposed even under Newt Gingrich. But okay, let's put it down there. Expose Washington money trail. Delegate powers back to the people. He's got quite a few ideas about how still to drain the swamp. And then some of the others, as you might imagine, defend our police, fully fund and hire more police and law enforcement, bring violent groups like Antifa to justice. By the way, I'm going to have something to say about that. Matter of fact, Bill Maher had something to say about that, so we'll get to that in just a minute. And then a couple others. He does take on the issue of illegal immigration and those issues. He talks about innovation. And one of the things he keeps talking about that, of course, everybody just rolls their eyes when he says it, is the Space Force. He talks about launching the Space Force, establish permanent man presence on the moon, send the first manned mission to Mars. I mean, again, this is really kind of thinking out of the box a little bit. And then finally, America First foreign policy, stop endless wars, bring our troops home. Of course, that's been the goal here from Afghanistan, wipe out global terrorists who threaten to harm Americas, build a great cybersecurity defense system and missile defense system. Anyway, the list just goes on, and I'm just giving you the tip of the iceberg, and it is available. It's on their website. If you go and type in Trump's second agenda on maybe Google, you'll find it. But it's amazing how many people in the mainstream press ignored it, possibly because they think there's not a chance that this president would be reelected. And besides, we don't like him anyway. But nevertheless, I wanted you to hear it from me because probably not going to hear it too many other places. But before we take a break, there has been a rumbling about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, again, unless you're watching Robert Reich, who was the former Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton, or maybe you were watching MSNBC and hearing Chris Hayes, you might say, I haven't heard anything about this. So let me try to educate you in the few minutes I have before we take another break. And that is, there are people talking about and calling for what's called a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And there are a number of people that have talked about this. And you might say, what is this? Well, the best example can be found in South Africa. If you remember, when South Africa came out of apartheid, there was a real desire to bring about a change. And so this is what is being proposed. There's a very good piece that Jim Garrity quotes from Kevin Baker that appeared in the New Republic, which is kind of left of center. But here's how Kevin Baker described it. He says this idea of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he says, I don't mean to claim that what has gone on here since the election of Donald Trump approaches what most of other nations have had when they wanted a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The first such effort was initiated by the president of Argentina in 1983. There was an earlier attempt in Bolivia in 1982, which was shut down. But nevertheless, there was also one in Uganda in 1974, which was overseen by Idi Amin. He's not counting either. Was actually created to soothe the still raw wounds of military dictatorship and dirty war that disappeared some 30,000 peoples. Since then, at least 42 other nations have tried similar means of getting the past and the crimes that they have confronted in order to bring about some kind of resolution. And that would be Rwanda and a variety of other places, or the reign of a white supremacist or apartheid regime in South Africa, or even Soviet-imposed communism in East Germany. And, of course, the argument is that, according to them, we've suffered so much under Donald Trump that we will actually have to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And, of course, as he points out a little bit later, The real question is, what would a newly elected Joe Biden do? Because if you remember, when Barack Obama took office, there were many Democrats at the time calling for prosecutions of George Bush, of Dick Cheney, of Donald Rumsfeld and some of the others for alleged war crimes and even the CIA's rendition programs. And so even before he was sworn in, President-elect Barack Obama indicated he had no real interest in that. He said, we need to look forward as opposed to looking backwards, and so set that aside. But would a Joe Biden actually want to put Donald Trump in jail? Keith Olbermann, everybody know who Keith Olbermann is? You know, he wants to put Trump in jail. My wife the other day said, why don't we put him in jail? But anyway, you know, the whole question about that and putting all the enablers, that'd be Mike Pence and a variety of other people, Sean Hannity, even including Amy Coney Barrett. He wants to put all of them in jail. But that's not what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is, but you're going to hear a lot about it. So you heard about it here first on Point of View.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
You know, since we're broadcasting primarily in the state of Texas at the moment, most of you probably have been to Austin, and one of the things you see quite often, bumper stickers and signs and everything, keep Austin weird. Now, it's kind of funny because if you go to Portland, Oregon, I was just in Portland recently, you don't see those bumper stickers because they know it's weird. They don't have to keep it. It is. And actually, I went into one shop and I did see a poster that said, keep Portland weird. But it was like, it's just redundant because Portland is weird. And the best illustration of it comes from Bill Maher, of all people. There are some times where I just roll my eyes at Bill Maher, but I do love one thing about that, and this is coming from the Oregonian, if nothing else. Of course, HBO series Real Time with Bill Maher. He oftentimes making jokes and has conversations, a lot about emphasis on politics, but he also, even though he is quite liberal and secular, nevertheless has a habit of criticizing what he thinks as behavior that is overly politically correct, right? And so that's where, on some cases, I find myself in complete agreement with him. And the other day on his show, I didn't watch it, but I was just reading about this in the newspaper, he was puzzled beyond belief because there had been another one of those riots in Portland we've heard about so many times. But in that particular case, they tore down a statue of Abraham Lincoln. Now, I was aware of that because I've seen that posted on a variety of different YouTube channels and other things. And it was promoted on social media during what's called Indigenous Peoples Day of Rage, which happens on the same day as Columbus Day. It's, of course, the counter-programming to Columbus Day. But nevertheless, Bill Maher was like, what? He says, I've got to give a shout out to Fred Armiston when he did Portlandia. Ever seen that show? I'm sure some of you have. You know, Steve, have you seen that? You've probably seen that. Pretty crazy stuff. Anyway, he said he got it right. And he went on to say that he always loved performing in Portland. But he said, I guess I missed about what's going on in Portland because the mayor there, Ted Wheeler, is about to lose to someone who's proudly Antifa. Only in Portland. Maybe Seattle, too. Okay. Maybe Madison, Wisconsin, maybe my hometown of Berkeley. Okay, so maybe, but mostly in Portland. What he's talking about here is they have a mayor's race up there. Of course, we have races all over the country. But in a couple of cases, the mayor's race take place at the same time as November 3rd. And what is happening here is the incumbent mayor, remember him, Ted Wheeler, he's losing dramatically to Sarah Bauer, I think is how you pronounce her name. She's the challenger. She has been proudly Antifa. If you've seen her pictures, matter of fact, one of the pictures people show all the time is her wearing a skirt, and on the skirt are the pictures of, I think it's Karl Marx, Lenin, a variety of others. Is Stalin in there? I don't think he is. Mao, a couple others, Che Guevara, whatever. Anyway, she is leading in the polls and declared herself an everyday anti-fascist. She's leading Ted Wheeler, the current mayor in Portland, by 11 points. This is over. I mean, 2 weeks from tomorrow, right, is the election. Now there is another poll that shows it a little closer race, but I think it's over. And so you're going to have the very liberal mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler, actually losing to an even more liberal, basically Marxist Antifa supporter. And if you think it's going to get even less weird in Portland, you won't need the bumper stickers, keep Portland weird. It will be weird. You will have somebody that you can't even imagine. Having grown up in Berkeley, okay, I do know what weird can really look like. I remember People's Park and all sorts of stuff. But nevertheless, we probably have a race that will for sure, unless there's some kind of last-minute turnout or turnaround, go to Sarah over Ted. And so Ted, might as well find another job. Matter of fact, you might even have seen where he went out there with the various protesters, and they just shouted him down and booed him, and he wasn't liberal enough. He wasn't woke enough for them. And so now Portland may get the most radical mayor you can possibly imagine. And like I said, only in Portland, but then again, I can think of some other places maybe that would take place. Well, nevertheless, just thought I'd end on that note. And just before we get into a very good conversation about how to deal with some of the tensions that we see in politics and religion and the rest, let me just mention that later this week, we do have what was supposed to be the third presidential debate, but it now became the second presidential debate. And I wrote a commentary about it, and Andrew was nice enough to post it up there, and Karen posted it as well. And when you go there, you will see that basically there are many people that are suggesting that maybe this whole commission on presidential debates is not really that helpful. I looked up the history, and really it started kind of in the late 80s. So, we've had presidential debates long before we had a presidential commission on debates. And Newt Gingrich the other day pointed out the fact that this whole debate format is really kind of obsolete. It's run by people whose average age, which I did not know until he said this, is 73 years of age. This is really kind of deep state establishment kind of people. And then points out some of the big, bizarre things that have happened during the debates. The last time I couldn't get anybody to be quiet enough to hear what the other person was saying. Points out the Candy Crowley moment in 2012 where she injected herself in the campaign and disagreed with Mitt Romney, who actually was right, but helped Barack Obama. And so a lot of people have simply said, okay, what should we do? Well, first of all, what we shouldn't do is, and the commission picked a registered Democrat, a friendly biographer of Nancy Pelosi, a Biden intern who now has actually been set aside for their first three moderators. Even the one coming in now has worked with Hillary Clinton. And so you might say, okay, smart guy, do you have any better ideas? Yes, I do. Here's just a few that I put on the commentary. First of all, one idea is just let the two candidates agree on a few topics and do it without a moderator. And it would sound maybe like the Lincoln-Douglas debate. If you think, no, they wouldn't let each other talk, okay. Then maybe what you do is you have one microphone goes live for 2 minutes, and they can talk. The other microphone is dead. Then that microphone goes off, then the other microphone goes on. There are some ways that you could very easily, without injecting a moderator, let them go back and forth, and you can just have a chance to hear from them. And they got 2 minutes, or if you want to make it 3 minutes or 5 minutes, I don't care. And then just turn the microphones on and off. If you say, no, we need a moderator, well, then Hugh Hewitt's been on the program with us before. He had a great suggestion. Let each one of them pick their own moderator, because the moderator coming in Thursday really is pretty obviously biased more towards the Clintons and the Bidens and the Obamas. Okay, understand that. Let's let Donald Trump pick his moderator. I don't know who that would be. Might be Sean Hannity. Who knows what it would be? And then the moderators can ask the other candidate a question that's maybe a lot more penetrating. And I love what Hugh Hewitt said. Who knows what might happen. A debate might break out. And so the point I'm making is that I give you three possible options that are superior to the one that we're going to have on Thursday. And we may not fix it this time, but before we have the next presidential debate, let's take seriously the possibility that this presidential commission on debates is not helpful, and it still keeps bringing in the insiders, and it doesn't really surface the kind of questions and interaction that needs to take place in a true debate. So that's my philosophy. If you agree or disagree, first of all, go to the website, pointofview.net. You can read it. And you can leave a comment. Of course, we post it also on Facebook and Twitter and a number of other places. And if you've got a better idea, I'm all ears, because I think what we have right now is not working. And I'm not so convinced that Thursday is going to work so well. But we'll find out, won't we? Let's take a break. Sarah Bauer Anderson will be with us right after these important messages.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You know, if you listen to Point of View, we oftentimes talk about this idea of civility, but it is kind of hard to find sometimes in an election season. But even after the election is over, is there going to be tension around the Thanksgiving table, the Christmas table, the time you gather with your families and those kinds of things? And so tension and division seem to be higher than ever. So that's why I wanted to spend about an hour really trying to look at this issue in a way that might help us as Christians be the kind of individuals that can provide some peace and some comfort and some graciousness and some civility in the midst of that conversation. We're going to be talking about this book, The Space Between Us, How Jesus Teaches Us to Live Together When Politics and Religion Pull Us Apart. It is written by Sarah Bauer Anderson, who is a native of the greater Washington, D.C. area, but now lives in Georgia. Raised in a family of politicos, as you probably gathered from that middle name Bauer. You probably have already figured out who her father was, and has been involved in ministry really since 2003, and has been a very lead content creator, writing for the XP3 high school curriculum. This book is about 250 pages, about 14 chapters. We're going to do our best to try to cover some of it in the next hour. And Sarah, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I know you've been doing some interviews on that, but those of us around the table have been looking forward to this interview with us. And if nothing else, talk about that in the general way, and then we'll get into the specifics in the book about listeners who are dealing with maybe tensions even in their own household or tensions with their extended family over this upcoming election. In some respects, that's why you wrote the book, isn't it?
Yeah. Like you mentioned, I come from a political family. My entire family has stayed involved in politics. They continue to be involved in politics. And as sometimes happens in families, we don't always land on the same page as we've gotten older and had different experiences. We kind of have come to see some things differently than other issues. And so I wrote the book really because my family was having to figure out, in some ways failing forward, having to figure out how to continue to have civil conversations with one another, how to value presence with one another, even if we didn't land on the same page. And, you know, we didn't have the option of not talking about it because of their involvement and because of my involvement in ministry. We couldn't stay away from these hot button issues of politics and religion. So we had to figure out a way to talk about it. And this book was really just kind of birthed out of what I've learned along the way, the gifts that my family gave me, and just continuing to honor our relationship, even when we didn't land on the same page, and remembering that there was just more that connected us than the things that kept us apart, and really just trying to draw from those commonalities and not just the things that made us different.
And I do appreciate that, because even when I get into conversations or even debates that I've done on college campuses and other people where we disagree, I always try to come back and say, you know, we probably have more in agreement than we have disagreement, so let's not always major on the minors. But let's go into this, because you got early on talk about the fact that sometimes we go into a discussion or a debate or a dialogue with the goal of changing another person's mind. Speak to that issue, because that, in some respects, helps us understand that maybe we need to change our attitude before we have one of those kind of discussions.
Right. Well, on just a very basic level, we can't really control whether somebody changes their mind or not. So we're kind of set up to lose if that's our intention going into a conversation, because most often they will not change their minds and will feel like a failure. But if we go into it with the idea of how to better understand somebody and where they're coming from and the experiences that they may have had that led them to believe the things that they believe, then most likely we're going to feel like we've met our goal. And that's going to be considered way more of a success than trying to change their minds. And I think that the problem is we go in trying to change people's minds mostly because we think that they're wrong and we're right, and that every disagreement is something we need to engage on, right? But we go into it instead seeing that they hold a different point of view, that it's not necessarily a right versus wrong on some of these issues, that there's just a different way to approach some of these things, then I think we'll have a lot more graciousness in the opinions that other people hold, even if they're different from ours.
And one of the things I've said before, because I've written about civility and have it in my book, Christian Ethics in Plain Language, and even some of our booklets, is if you go to, for example, the epistle to the Philippians and the idea of having a humility of mind, it does seem to me that the Apostle Paul is calling for us to have humility. When I go into a conversation with an individual, I sometimes recognize that even if I may disagree, I want to pay attention and I want to listen, because I'm not the repository of all information and all values in the universe, and it is quite possible that other person might have a perspective or might raise a question or have an argument that I haven't thought about. And so in some respects, a lot of civility goes back to this issue of humility, doesn't it?
Yes, 100%. I think you nailed it. And it seems like such a basic principle, right, to just go in thinking that maybe I don't have everything figured out. But that seems kind of lacking when it comes to a lot of our conversations right now, especially when it comes to politics. But, you brought up the epistle to the Philippians. There's also this TED Talk I saw a couple of weeks ago that reminded me of the same thing. I think Catherine Schwartz is her name, but she talked about, she asked the audience, what does it feel like when you're wrong about something? And people started throwing out answers like it's embarrassing or it's humiliating or, all these different things. And she said, no, that's what it feels like when you've discovered you're wrong. Before you know you're wrong, it feels a lot like being right. And that idea, none of us are holding wrong ideas on purpose. All of us are holding an opinion or a belief or a conviction that we've landed on for some reason or another. And so going into conversations knowing it's possible that I could be wrong on this, that I haven't reached this destination, kind of like what you said, of having understood everything. There's nothing more for me to possibly learn. But to approach a conversation, like you said, with that posture of humility, as being a learner and not just a teacher, not just trying to convince somebody, but seeing a relationship and seeing an interaction as a way for you to learn about that person, for you to learn about their experiences and their opinions and their beliefs, and not come down with a sense of judgment, but just kind of a peer. We're figuring this out together. We're journeying together and trying to arrive at the best conclusions possible. I think that posture makes such a difference in how the tone of the conversation goes.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Sarah Bauer Anderson is with us as we talk about her book, The Space Between Us. And having grown up in the Bauer family, I want to talk a little bit about what it was like in Washington, D.C., this kind of tribalism mentality that she talks about. And as bad as that has been over the years, and I'm certainly well aware of that, having lived in that region of the country, how has the online community and maybe even these silos maybe even made it worse, in which we now only hear from people who look like us and think like us. And so we're going to get into some of those issues as well. And then we're going to talk about, context and clusters and congruence and even the idea of beliefs and convictions and opinions and a number of other things, so that we can kind of help you work your way through this. And if you find yourself saying, I'd be real interested in this book and like to maybe use it in a small group study, each one of the chapters ends with some things to think about and some conversation starters. So again, we wanted you to know about it today, but let's take a break. Sarah Bauer Anderson with us, The Space Between Us, How Jesus Teaches Us to Live Together When Politics and Religion Pull Us Apart. We'll continue our conversation with her right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Sometimes presidential debates can be helpful, but the Commission on Presidential Debates is not helpful. I was thinking about this the other day and then came upon a commentary by Newt Gingrich with a similar concern. He persuasively argues that the time has come to recognize how arrogant, biased, and obsolete the Debate Commission has become. The members of the commission decided recently to require a virtual debate with no consultation with the Trump campaign. That effectively killed the next debate. Gingrich asks, what can you expect from the arrogance of a collection of establishment figures averaging 73 years of age? The bias was there long before the recent presidential and vice presidential debates. He mentions the Candy Crowley moment in 2012 in which she injected her comments into the debate against Mitt Romney. There are many other examples, but that one stands out even more than the most recent examples. Consider that the commission picked a registered Democrat, a friendly biographer of Nancy Pelosi, and a Biden intern as the first three moderators. Nearly all of the moderators in the last few election cycles have been Washington insiders and left-of-center members of the media. Here are some suggestions. Let the two candidates agree on a few topics with no moderator. This would resemble the famous Abraham Lincoln-Stephen Douglas debates. Don't think this would work? One idea would be to open the microphone for one candidate for 2 minutes until the microphone goes dead, then open the microphone up for the other candidate. If you think we need a moderator, Hugh Hewitt has a suggestion. Each candidate is allowed to name his or her moderator. Moderators would alternate questions and let the candidate speak for 10 minutes. He concludes, who knows what will happen? A debate might break out. It's time for a better format for these presidential debates. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Sarah Bauer Anderson with us today as we talk about her book, The Space Between Us. And I thought we might talk, Sarah, about the tribalism mentality in Washington, D.C. And we've had Jonathan Haidt on the program. Matter of fact, later on, we're going to talk about the book Righteous Mind. But we had him on recently to talk about the coddling of the American mind. And the third untruth he talks about is the untruth of us versus them. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. It used to be, not so long ago, even in Washington, D.C., that even if I disagree with you, I just think we disagree. In other words, your view may be wrong, but now the view is your view is evil. And that's, I think, even exacerbated, as you point out in the book, by these online communities, because we now are almost surrounded by people who look like us and think like us. And that's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big problem. And I think what the bigger problem is that we're in these communities, these isolated kind of silos, a lot of times without even realizing it. So I think before social media was such a big part of our lives, if we wanted to isolate and only be around people who thought like we did, we would intentionally make that decision. But now because of social media and the algorithms and the results and the things that we're clicking on, we are creating an echo chamber without even realizing it. And I think that becomes even more dangerous because you think you're reading something or you're hearing something that's the unbiased truth and that this is the facts laid out for you that can only be told. And in reality, it's distorted based on how much time we're spending on certain sites or different people that we're following and commenting on. And it's creating a very narrow scope of reality. So I think it's very dangerous. It's always been dangerous, but I think it's even more dangerous now because we're living less aware of it, I think.
Well, you grew up in Washington, D.C. You had a father, of course, that was involved in the political arena, and a mother as well, by the way, so I'm not excluding her at all. But then you go off to college, and one day you see a sign that says, God loves Democrats too. And you go, what? Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. I grew up very conservative Christian family. I went to a very conservative Christian college where I would say probably 99% of everybody else there was exactly like me, white evangelical Republican, and I liked it that way. I thought that was how we all were. And I was leaving campus, leaving a dorm room on one side of campus, and I saw this poster that said Jesus loves Democrats too, and I thought it was funny, but I also was like, wait, is that true? Like, yeah, maybe he loves them, but does he like them as much as he likes Republicans? And it really just kind of created this crack in my worldview a little bit, because up until that point, I had assumed Jesus was everything like me, that he co-signs on all of the political opinions and beliefs that I had, and that if he were here, he'd be a registered Republican, and that was just the way that it was. But that sign kind of jolted me out of this box that I think I tried to put Jesus in, and assumed that he would have been exactly like me, when in reality, I think Jesus spent a lot of his ministry making all kinds of groups of people uncomfortable and never really fitting into one group or one box or the other. And so that kind of introduced that idea to me that maybe if Jesus looks a lot like me, then maybe I'm following an idolized version of myself and not Jesus at all.
I've told the story before, but it's worth mentioning it as well. Having grown up in Berkeley, California, and the San Francisco Bay Area, and then living in Dallas, I saw two different conversations happening within the space of 1 week. When I was in the San Francisco Bay Area, I had somebody say, I don't know how anybody who's a Christian could vote for Ronald Reagan. And then at the same time, I'm in Dallas and hearing people saying, I don't know how anybody's a Christian who could not vote for Ronald Reagan, and to use an individual that was your father's boss. So you can see that in those different arenas, people have actually developed that kind of tribalism. And that was true back in the 1980s, probably even before you were born, but it's gotten a lot worse. And so you talk about what I call the 3 C's. When you're interacting with an individual, you talk about the need to talk about context, clusters, and congruence. And I think it might be helpful because I want to give people an understanding on how to maybe carry on a conversation. And of course, you can never control what the other person might do. You can be as nice and as gracious as possible, and they still may overreact to you, but at least you are responsible for how you deal with this idea of context, clusters, and congruence. Can you explain that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically the idea is just trying to become more self-aware of what you're bringing into the conversation without even realizing it. There's more happening than just the words coming out of your mouth. So the context is, like say you're in the same family as this person. So there's a family history. There's a history of, the conflict that you've had before, or, your siblings, there's kind of sibling rivalry that plays into it. That's just kind of just below the surface that's influencing how this conversation is going, even if it's not directly talked about. If it's a disagreement between a boss and an employee, then you've got kind of like an authority issue kind of going on here as well. So there's lots of different factors when it comes to the context of this conversation to keep in mind that may be making it more tense than it would be otherwise. The other thing to pay attention to is to try not to isolate one sentence or one kind of form of body language that might be sending a negative message to you, but instead to pay attention to, on the whole, what is this conversation looking like? Like if they look like they're rolling their eyes, is it possible that they saw something over your shoulder and this isn't actually in reaction to you? It's taking in that full picture and not kind of living with this really narrow tunnel vision of believing the worst in that person or where the conversation is going. And it's just making sure that you're aware of the nonverbal text and clues that are happening around you. We lean so much into the words and the tone that's happening, which, can be especially dangerous when it comes to social media because you can't hear tone. So we put so much weight in kind of the unspoken things that are happening there. But when you're talking one-on-one with somebody, you really do want to try to pay attention that there are other contributing factors that can make this conversation go really poorly, and to not automatically assume that person is out to get you or disagree with you or is evil, like you mentioned before. You don't want to automatically jump to that conclusion, but just take into account the other factors that could complicate the conversation.
And again, those are just kind of basic principles. You know, when we sometimes talk about this idea of civility, I say basically it's Matthew 22, and that is the idea of the golden rule, that you should love your neighbor as yourself. And of course, it's the golden rule that you would treat other people as you would want to be treated. And it's really kind of the heart of some of the basic kinds of ideas that we so actually communicate with. And even in the New Testament, you see the Apostle Paul saying that you don't overcome evil with evil, you overcome evil with good. And so in some respects, it requires a level of humility, recognizes that you see in Proverbs 15 that a gentle answer turns away wrath, trying to seek to understand that individual. Those are just some kind of basic ideas that sometimes have sort of evaporated in our high octane, intense, counterpoint kind of society. And if we can be models of graciousness and civility, I think the Christians will stand out because we'll be so different than the rest of the world, don't you think?
That's right. Well, I try to, remind myself of this because I think we all probably need reminding. The thing that Jesus said we would be known for is not our truth-telling and not our holding the right positions, but for our love of one another. And so I think we need to be really careful of the witness we have with each other, but also to the world that's watching of how are we treating each other? What does it look like Jesus cares about based on our attitude towards people who think differently than we do? And I think where we get into a lot of trouble is when we go back to assuming that idea that Jesus is on our side, whatever side that happens to be. I think it makes us think that we can get away with some really bad behavior towards the other side because God must be against them if he's with us. Just being really careful how we put him in that box and then living in a way that is reflective to the rest of the world that Jesus is bigger than the boxes and that regardless of the positions we're holding, he is for everybody. He is for the people behind all of the positions.
And again, just watch what you say. I mean, James 3, of course, talks about the fact that the tongue is very dangerous. Ephesians 4 talks about not letting any unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but that which is good for edification and the rest. So we need to take a break. And when we come back, we have a lot more to cover in this book. We'll talk a little bit about maybe even a personal inventory. We sort of alluded to that, beliefs, convictions, and opinions. We quoted from Jonathan Haidt. He has a very good piece from a book that I also have, Righteous Mind, which we didn't interview him on, but talks about how sometimes we even have tension within ourselves. And then the need for respect. Just think about the conversation we had a while back with Arthur Brooks saying that the biggest deal, and this even goes back to our conversation even much earlier with Senator Ben Sass, our biggest problem is not respect. Our biggest problem is contempt and what is happening there, and even the issue of shaming and those kinds of things. So we have a lot more to cover. It's all part of this book, The Space Between Us, How Jesus Teaches Us to Live Together When Politics and Religion Pull Us Apart. If you'd like to know more about the book, it is available on the website. You can get it in paperback or Kindle. We also have a link to her website, which we'll talk about after the break, a Facebook page, Twitter post, all sorts of other resources, and simply go to our website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, just click on that button that says See More. It will take you down to her website, which is sarahbanderson.com. We also, of course, have a link to some of the other material that she has, the Twitter posts and all of that is available. And so it's all on our website, pointofview.net. We'll continue our conversation about civility and being a peacemaker in the midst of the tension around us right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Sarah Bauer Anderson. Again, the book is entitled The Space Between Us, How Jesus Teaches Us to Live Together When Politics and Religion Pull Us Apart. We also have a link, Sarah, to your website, your Twitter posts, and if people would like to connect with you, that is available on our website, pointofview.net. They can also get a copy of the book. It's both available in paperback and Kindle. And I might just for a minute talk about how people can use this. 14 different chapters. And at the end of almost every one of these chapters, you have kind of a what now. And so you have some information about it, maybe some suggested questions. And so for listeners out there that say, this is a conversation we need to have in our small group, our Bible study, our Sunday school class, you've written in such a way that you really can begin to work through this and even start some discussion in your various groups, haven't you?
Yeah, that's the hope. I've actually been so encouraged at the number of people I've heard using it within their families, generationally, having adult children and parents having these conversations and asking these questions. I think it's been a really helpful tool in that way, which I love to hear. And the point in having those questions was not, again, to get people to try to change their minds, but for people to be more introspective about how they've landed on the positions they've landed on, what might they be doing to contribute to unhealthy dialogue, and then what can they do, internally, the work themselves to kind of contribute to a healthier conversation.
Let's give everybody some more tools for their conversational toolbox. And you've said before that in order to sort of navigate the space between us, we need to take a personal inventory and maybe think about the differences. And I'd like you maybe to go through this between beliefs, convictions, and opinions, because I thought that was something that you not only write about, but even have as one of your what now questions to maybe help people think through. So how do we kind of navigate the space between us looking at those three very important principles?
Yeah, well, that kind of came from this idea that when every hill is a hill that we're dying on, then nothing is, right? We're engaging every argument, every issue, like all of our emotional attention and energy is going towards it. And I think we're starting to lose some influence with people because our relational equity is going down because we're arguing about every single thing. And all of a sudden, the issues that we care the most about, we become like white noise. No one can hear us anymore. So the idea in determining what our beliefs, convictions, and opinions are is to decide what are the issues, what are the topics that deserve our most emotional energy, what are the things that we really are going to fight for, that we're willing to draw a line in the sand over. These are the things. And so beliefs, we would start there. Those are the things that are really identity shaping. Like these are the things you can't imagine ever changing your mind are that they've really shaped who you are as a person and how you see the world. So those are very foundational ideas. Then you've got convictions. You've got very strong feelings about them, but you understand that there are people who have landed on the other side of this issue. Even if you don't ever anticipate changing your mind on it, you can understand that there are people who have. And then opinions is really what we either don't know very much about or maybe we know a little bit about, but we're way more open to learning about. And, if we could probably change our mind by the end of the day if we found out a new piece of information. So the idea here is to kind of figure out what deserves our emotional energy. And in some cases, it's not going to be our beliefs, because if we're in a conversation with someone that has a fundamentally different understanding of the world, it could be, I care too much about this topic. I'm going to get too emotionally involved in this, but this is not worth me having an argument over when I know that we're just going to walk away having the same idea. But what are the things that we can talk about in a more civil way, because there isn't a lot of emotional energy behind them? So kind of learning what deserves your attention, what doesn't. I kind of like to say you don't have to attend every argument you're invited, and I think you're invited to. And I think that the beliefs, convictions, and opinions helps us figure out what are the arguments that we want to attend, what are the things that are worth us engaging over, what are the conversations we want to have, and not just the arguments that we want to have, and kind of figure out how we want to approach all of those.
And again, like I said, and you just said a minute ago, that not everything is a hill worth dying on, and we've talked about that before. And to flip it around, we all know individuals that are have just one topic. Maybe they're convinced the only issue is racism, the only issue is global warming or climate change, the only issue is whatever it might be. And after a while, you just don't even want to be around them because they take everything back to that issue. And after a while, you just say, Okay, I really can't even have a conversation with that. Well, don't be that person. Is what we're saying here. There
Exactly.
are, don't live in the world where you either agree with me or not. It's my way or the highway, and I think you're going to be a lot better off. Okay, I just mentioned something that creates the word fear. There is fear. And of course, one of the things you talk about here is fear will only take us so far. Faith can take us further. A lot of this, Sarah, is fearful. First of all, they're going to take away this, they're not going to allow pre-existing conditions. This candidate is the embodiment of evil. This person looks like he's Hitler, whatever it might be. And there is a sense in which we have to pay attention to the fear-mongering that has been taking place for some time in the political arena, don't we?
Yeah. And I think as long as I can remember, fear has been a part of the political plays, right? You see it on the campaign ads, on television, the flyers, the mailers, all these different things. Fear is definitely used as kind of a bargaining tool. The thing that I think makes it more complicated is when there are things to legitimately be afraid of. And I think we need to be careful that we don't write off every person's experience of fear and say that's not real or that's not a big deal. I think we have to live in awareness that this is some people's lived experience, and even if the reality that's not the actual reality, it's their lived reality. So I think we need to pay attention to that. So I don't want to be trite or glib about just saying, faith over fear and it's no big deal, because I think there's a lot of people on both sides who are concerned if one party gets elected or another. They're fearful of what might happen. And so I think it's worth paying attention to. But I want to make sure that we are not allowing fear to call the shots, that we are not putting God, making him smaller in light of our fear, but instead really just leaning into his bigness and leaning into his sovereignty and his goodness. And these are the things that we need to rest on more than any kind of legislation or any party or president who's in office.
And again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be fearful of some of the agendas that have been put forward or the rest, but at least help us understand that. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We might take a phone call, but we certainly have so many things to cover. And one of those is, I mentioned Jonathan Haidt earlier. He's been on the program with us, not a Christian, but his previous book, Righteous Mind, which I find myself quoting from because, first of all, in that one of the studies, he points out that oftentimes conservatives are better understanding liberals than liberals understanding conservatives, in part because conservatives have to read New York Times, Washington Post, watch television, go to more liberal universities and all that. But one of the other things that you talk about in the book is that we all have to live within tension of ourselves. We'd like to think that we have a perfect worldview. It's coherent. It is consistent. It doesn't have any contradictions. The reality is, no, we have inbuilt tensions even in our own minds, don't we?
Right. Yeah. No, I love Jonathan Haidt's work on all of that. One of the things that he talks about is we like to think of ourselves as being rational creatures, and that we are looking for the unbiased truth. But he talks about we're very emotional creatures, and what we're actually looking for is something to confirm what we already think. And being aware of that just allows us to be a little bit more, I think, self-critical in a good way of where we're getting our information, but then being more generous towards other people as well, as they're looking for things to confirm what they already think. But yes, I love his work, and he does talk a lot about that idea of just competing morality foundations, and that we are okay when it comes to our own personal lives, not always being, agreeing with ourselves, but we are not okay when it comes to how we see other people, and they conflict with our own ideas.
Let's take a break, but just before we do so, we're going to set up what we'll talk about next, and that's what Sarah calls the What You Too experience. And a good illustration to take it out of politics for just a minute, as you well know, there's kind of this internal tension sometimes on the issue of origin between the so-called young Earth creationist and the old Earth creationist, young Earth creationist, and those who would be called progressive creationist. They oftentimes say all sorts of things about each other, and one of my colleagues was part of a group that that brought the two groups together, many times for the first time. And it was interesting to see that sometimes the old Earth creationists would say to the young Earth creationists, groups like Answers in Genesis, Institute for Creation Research, what? You believe that? I didn't know you believe that. And sometimes the young Earth creationists would say, maybe like Reasons to Believe progressive creationists, oh, I didn't know you held to that view. And so sometimes in the same room on the issue of the age of the earth, you found a little more agreement than maybe the two particular parties understood. Well, if that's true there, after the break, I want Sarah to address that issue as well, because she calls this kind of the what you two experience. And that is something that, again, can provide some bridges rather than barriers, and we'll talk about that. We'll also get into the issue of respect and shaming, and a couple of other issues, but we need to take a break. We'll continue our conversation as we talk about this book, The Space Between Us, right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Sarah Bauer Anderson as we talk about the book, The Space Between Us. In here, you talk about C.S. Lewis said, friendship is born at the moment when one man says to another, what, you too? I thought no one but myself. And in some respects, that is another principle that you talk about in your book.
Yes, that's right. You know, you touched on that a little bit before we went to break about bringing in two different groups of people, a young Earth and old Earth creationists, and finding that they had more in common. And I think this idea of finding these commonalities with each other is really only possible when we're willing to engage with people who we don't see ourselves having a lot in common with right away. But I think, we're tending to want to gravitate towards the people who just think like we do because it's easier. It's harder mentally to be around people who think differently than us. It causes our brain to do more work than it wants to do. But I think when we are more proactive in surrounding ourselves with people who may have a different worldview, who may have a different position on things, we're starting to see the world through their eyes, and they move from being a narrative or part of a group that we've kind of lumped into this one big category, and they become a person. They become a name and a face and an individual with a story that you might have a lot more in common with than you originally thought.
So good. Near the end of your book, you get into the issue of respect. Of course, the contrary to that is contempt. We've talked with Arthur Brooks about that. That's in his book. That was something he talked about at the National Prayer Breakfast. In the past, we've talked with Senator Ben Sasse about that. And then you also get into this idea of shaming. It seems to me that we are going to have to be really careful about how we respond. And I try, and I think all of us fail from time to time, to treat every argument as if it was intentionally put forward as serious, especially on the college campus. I would see sometimes somebody would make some snarky comment, but I would come back and say, I would take it as if it was serious, even if it wasn't intended. It sort of elevates the conversation. And yet when we use contempt or we use shaming rather than respect and graciousness, it devolves into something that we simply don't want to have happen if we're going to have any kind of meaningful dialogue in the 21st century.
Yeah, you touched on that perfectly. Yeah, the issue with the shaming, there's a lot of problems wrong with it, intellectually and when it comes to those kinds of conversations. But even more important, as followers of Jesus, when it comes to shame, that is not something we want to be known for, because that's not something that he did. Jesus was always leaving room for people to be restored and redeemed and resurrected. He was never writing the ends of stories for people and their lives. But I think with the shaming culture, which is closely related, I think, to canceling culture, we're just writing people off. We're seeing a snapshot of people's lives and making a decision on what their future is like as a result of that. And so we've got to get rid of this idea of shaming. It's not changing behavior in the long run. We might get, a public groveling or, confession or an apology or something like that. But if what we're really after is for people to have a change of heart about something or to see something in a different way, then we have to be much more careful with our relational cues that we're giving and the conversations that we're happening. I think shaming might make us feel good. It might make for great entertainment on the social media world. But if we're actually looking to further a cause, shaming is only going to hurt it.
Yes, and it's tempting to respond in kind and those kinds of things. I understand that, but if nothing else, I think your final chapters certainly address that. But I thought I'd want maybe close by having you tell a story that both Steve and I appreciated, the story of Erin, who came out as gay when she was young and was really destructively drinking until she was 30, becomes a believer and is baptized. But then you tell the rest of the story because it's a powerful story, because let's face the fact that sanctification takes a while and we expect instantaneous changes, and that's not true in our life, and we shouldn't put it on somebody else, should we?
Right. Yeah, no, Erin's a friend of ours, and I loved her story. We've stayed close in the years since she got baptized. But the thing that I loved about Erin's story was just her willingness to be honest about what she had struggled with, and her willingness to say, this is what God was doing in her life right now. And it just brought to my attention that we are so quick to create formulas that we think people's life change should look like. We think that the trajectory of an individual life should kind of follow the same benchmarks as everybody else's, probably more like ours, we think, more than anything else. And the thing about Erin was she was saying that God had done this huge thing in her life where she was no longer an alcoholic. She was in AA. She hadn't touched alcohol since joining AA and had these 9 years, now I think 9 years of sobriety under her belt. And we were missing that because we were hung up on the fact that she said she was gay. And so the idea here is we've got to widen our lens to see that what if God is doing something different and we're missing it because we're so hung up on the fact that he's not doing what we expect him to do and when we expect him to do it. So Erin's story has always been this reminder to me, just keep this bigger picture. Don't make God small by making him think that he has to behave, he's got to move in the way that we expect him to, that he's so much bigger than that, and to leave room for surprise and mystery in what he could be doing in your life and the lives of the people around you.
Yes. And again, think of the questions Jesus was asked. Why do you eat with sinners and tax collectors? How many times should we forgive? And you give the number that we've used before, that as far as we can tell, there are about 187 questions. I've seen it up to 300 because sometimes people double count the different synoptic gospels. But the bottom line is, just using your numbers, 187 questions. Jesus answered directly 3. So, in some respects, we are talking about the model for our behavior. Maybe we should maybe provide a little more grace in the midst of it. Just before we let you go, let's talk about what is on your website, because you have some great resources, and all you have to do is go to our website, pointofview.net. But if you want to go directly at Sarah B for Bauer, SarahBAnderson.com. You have tips for surviving the election season. You have information about your book, Space Between Us. Talk about what people will find when they land on your website.
Yeah, I've got several, a couple of pages worth of blogs on trying to keep up in different current events. I write a lot about parenting as well, and faith, and I'm involved in church world and ministry world, so that shows up a lot there too. And my husband and I co-wrote a devotional for middle schoolers and high schoolers that you can find there as well. And a lot of just different kind of parenting resources. You know, we've got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, and so I put together a devotional for Christmas for our kids that you can find there, and one for leading up to Easter, kind of a Lent devotional. So just different resources to kind of help parents along in their journey, but also kind of navigating the cultural and political conversations that are happening in our world as well.
There's a way for people to subscribe to your newsletter. And I know enough about your personality. I know you probably are going to be providing other resources in addition to this book, videos and all sorts of other things. Of course, the blog posts are all there. And so just take the time to go to sarahbanderson.com, or if you don't want to go there, we have also a link to your, I think it's Twitter post. Of course, you're on Instagram, a number of others, so people can connect up with you. And if nothing else, I want to thank you, first of all, for writing the book. And second of all, thank you for giving us an hour here on Point of View.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Let's, if we can, take a break. And just before we do so, got a couple things to point out, and that is you're going to face some tensions. You know, it might be during this election season or after the election season. It might be on a Thanksgiving table. It might be at a Christmas gathering. It might be just a conversation you're having in work, and you might say, okay, we are in very divided, polarizing times. Can we, as believers, actually provide grace and civility in the midst of the incredible tension? And so that's why I thought you might really enjoy this book, The Space Between Us, Sarah Bauer Anderson, and how Jesus teaches us to live together when politics and religion pull us apart. And I think you're going to find a lot of great information in about 250 pages, 14 different chapters, and a section here called What Now for those of you that want to maybe use it as a small group conversation, a Bible study, or other kind of material. The book came out in September, so it is available, and you might find it in your local bookstore, but we've made it very easy for you to find it on the web page as well. You've been listening to Point of View.
(2020). It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend some time, first of all, talking about a couple of stories that we've posted on the website, some commentaries, which are in two ways actually going to introduce you to conversations we're going to have later in the week. One that is our website. 1/3 of excess deaths in U.S. during pandemic were not due to the coronavirus study. That, in some respects, is kind of an introduction to a conversation we'll have during this second hour on Wednesday with Dr. Jay Richards about his book, The Price of Panic. Then also have one on why the left needs the racist label, which is perfectly a setup to the conversation we'll be having during this hour on Thursday with Dr. Doug Groothuis, in which he really takes on and does a very good and I think very systematic analysis of what's called critical race theory. So we'll cover those real quickly if we can, just if nothing else to kind of introduce you to conversations we're going to have later in the week, which will be much more extensive. And then if we have time, before the bottom of the hour, we want to also maybe talk about what is the second term agenda for Donald Trump. It was something that was actually promoted, and the mainstream press pretty much ignored it. And so I thought you might want to say, well, if Donald Trump is reelected, what's he planning on doing? That's a good question. And then our friend Bill Maher, and I put friend in quotes, did raise a question the other day about what is happening in this mayor election in Portland. And since we'll be talking about some of the Antifa and other things, I thought it would be appropriate there. Then at the bottom of the hour, we will get to another book that I thought would be kind of good to summarize. It gets us into some of those issues of theology and apologetics we talk about so often here on Point of View. Shelby Abbott will be with us. He has a book called Doubtless, Because Faith is Hard. And how do we deal with issues of doubt? Questions you might have, questions your children, grandchildren might have. I think you will appreciate that. And so that just gives you an overview of what we'll be talking about this hour. And in some respects, I'm giving you a preview of what will be taking place later in the week. First article here, 1/3 of excess deaths in U.S. pandemic were not due to the coronavirus. This is a study that came from the American Medical Association. Actually, it's on their website right now, and it was a study done. It's not peer-reviewed yet, so again, take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, but it's pretty good because it shows that if you look at the total U.S. death count comparing it year to year, and you look at March to July, the death rate is about 20% higher. Okay, but it turns out that almost 67% of those deaths were due to COVID-19, but it means that about a third, or 33%, were not. And that may be new information to you. As a matter of fact, the website goes on to say some states have greater difficulty than others in containing community spread, causing protracted elevations and excess deaths that extended into the summer. Excess deaths attributed to causes other than COVID-19 could reflect deaths from unrecognized or undocumented infection with severe acute respiratory syndrome and a variety of others. And this article also then goes into a study that appeared in the Washington Post, which caught my attention because they're also attributing some of these excess deaths to dementia deaths. Who would have guessed? I mean, we think some of the excess deaths are due to the fact that because we had a lockdown, people weren't getting cancer treatments, they weren't getting cancer screenings and things of that nature. But one other that has surfaced, and this now quoting from the Washington Post, Beyond the staggering U.S. deaths caused directly by the novel coronavirus, more than 134,200 deaths have died from Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia since March. That's at least 13,200 deaths greater than what we've seen in previous years. And so it says, overlooked amid America's war against the coronavirus is this reality. People with dementia are dying not just from the virus, but from the very strategy of isolation that's supposed to protect them. They go on and say, in recent months, doctors have reported increased falls, pulmonary infections, depression, and sudden frailty in patients who have been stable for years. And so you have a number of states with the highest per capita rate, some that you expect, New York, New Jersey, Michigan, but others maybe you wouldn't have expected, Louisiana, Arizona, Mississippi, Maryland, Delaware, Rhode Island. So if nothing else, remind us of something we will talk about more on Wednesday with Dr. Jay Richards in his new book. The other article I posted is Why the Left Needs the Racist Label, and this is written by an individual who is a professor, basically, of Hillsdale College, David Ezrod, and he said that America is a racist country is the great self-evident truth of the left and the ruling class whose moral opinions are shaped by it. The truth, he says, and he's putting this in quote, is self-evident in the sense that being readily apparent by finding these various disparities in life outcomes between blacks and whites. But, of course, no explanation of the disparities have ever required. Just the fact that you have a disparity proves racism. Except the problem with that argument is there's also disparity between Asians and whites, between people that are from India and whites, even between Nigerian immigrants and whites in terms of income, educational attainment, all the rest. I mean, more Asians have as I have a commentary coming out this week, have a higher median family income in the Asian community than you have in the white community. Nobody believes that there is a racist action against whites, higher income level for Indians over whites, education over whites. Much more Indians go to college, graduate from college, all those kinds of things. And the point he's making is that this has all sort of become a self-evident truth that cannot be refuted. As we'll talk about with Doug Groteis, as he really got into this issue of the idea of critical race theory, which was first put forward by Derek Bell, who was one of the founders of that, and at that time was at Harvard University, later became the dean of the University of Oregon Law School, basically argued that you cannot refute this because the system is so biased against African Americans, against black perspective, that any piece of evidence you provide, any counter argument, is just simply dismissed out of hand. By the way, this is very interesting, this article, and I did not realize this. In 1991, Derek Bell developed that at Harvard. He also made the claim that at Harvard University, interestingly enough, there has been no progress in America since 1865. Need a counter-argument? Yeah. In 1865, Harvard did not admit black students. The fact that he was a tenured professor for 2 decades at Harvard, I think, undermines his own argument. And, of course, as he goes on in this particular piece, it says no one is denying that America was racist for centuries, that the legacy of racism may even still be with us, but that when you look at what is on the books at the federal level, that'd be the 1964 Civil Rights Act, or in any of the 50 states, or in any of the 19,502 incorporated cities, towns, and villages, do you see systemic racism there today? And his argument is, no, you don't. And if nothing else, this is kind of a setup for the conversation we're going to have with Doug Groteis, who actually has done quite a bit of work on the area of apologetics, but turned his philosophical skills towards critical race theory. And we're going to spend some time talking about that on Thursday during this hour, so I hope you'll tune in then. Let's take a break, though. What's the second agenda of Donald Trump look like? We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Sometimes presidential debates can be helpful, but the Commission on Presidential Debates is not helpful. I was thinking about this the other day and then came upon a commentary by Newt Gingrich with a similar concern. He persuasively argues that the time has come to recognize how arrogant, biased, and obsolete the Debate Commission has become. The members of the commission decided recently to require a virtual debate with no consultation with the Trump campaign. That effectively killed the next debate. Gingrich asks, what can you expect from the arrogance of a collection of establishment figures averaging 73 years of age? The bias was there long before the recent presidential and vice presidential debates. He mentions the Candy Crowley moment in 2012 in which she injected her comments into the debate against Mitt Romney. There are many other examples, but that one stands out even more than the most recent examples. Consider that the commission picked a registered Democrat, a friendly biographer of Nancy Pelosi, and a Biden intern as the first three moderators. Nearly all of the moderators in the last few election cycles have been Washington insiders and left-of-center members of the media. Here are some suggestions. Let the two candidates agree on a few topics with no moderator. This would resemble the famous Abraham Lincoln-Stephen Douglas debates. Don't think this would work? One idea would be to open the microphone for one candidate for 2 minutes until the microphone goes dead, then open the microphone up for the other candidate. If you think we need a moderator, Hugh Hewitt has a suggestion. Each candidate is allowed to name his or her moderator. Moderators would alternate questions and let the candidate speak for 10 minutes. He concludes, who knows what will happen? A debate might break out. It's time for a better format for these presidential debates. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
You know, one of the questions you probably would want to ask is what would be the agenda for a Biden presidency or a Trump presidency? Well, to his credit, Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, and the Republicans put together an agenda. And you might say, well, of course, they've had a platform. No, let's be honest here. A platform, whether it's the Republican platform or the Democratic platform, is a wish list. It doesn't have specific dates or times or numbers. And it's great because it gives you something of an understanding. But both of those platforms are more than 60 pages long. I think one of them, the Democratic platform, isn't it 91 pages, something like that? That's a wish list. What you want is something that says, what's your agenda? What are your priorities? What are you going to try to accomplish? And the bottom line is, to the credit of the Trump campaign and Donald Trump, he did put forth an agenda. And I just came across it recently on Facebook, and I said, did this just not get any coverage? And okay, I'll give some credit. Vox covered it a little bit, Los Angeles Times did, but most did not. Now, why didn't the mainstream press cover it? Well, I have at least 4 good reasons. Number one, they don't like Donald Trump. Okay, got that one, figured that one out. Number 2, they don't think he will win. As a matter of fact, they're so convinced he's not winning, they're now talking about putting together a Truth and Reconciliation Commission under the Biden presidency to try to address all of the what they think are negative things that have happened during Donald Trump's reign over 4 years. So they're already measuring the drapes in the Oval Office, so they don't think he's going to win. Another one, I think, is that they don't believe that political promises will be kept. I did a commentary a while back, and that wasn't until I did the research that I realized this goes back centuries. The phrase political promises are like pie crusts. They're actually intended to be broken. Well, you know what? Donald Trump did a pretty good job of actually keeping his promise on most of those promises. And as he points out, these are very specific things in his agenda. And then finally, maybe they didn't cover it because they didn't want to embarrass Joe Biden, because think about it, Joe Biden has not told us whether or not he's going to pack the court, hasn't given us a list of who he would put on the Supreme Court, hasn't really come out strongly one way or the other about ending the filibuster, and on and on and on and on. So, if nothing else, let's give credit to Donald Trump. I've got in front of me here the second-term agenda. By the way, if you want to find it, you will find it in some newspapers and things like that. And just type in Trump second-term agenda, and probably it'll pop up. But the first one, as you might imagine, is jobs. Create 10 million new jobs in 10 months. Create 1 million new small businesses. Expand the opportunity zones. By the way, it illustrates, again, the difference between an agenda and a platform. An agenda is kind of like a to-do list. If you just say, well, I want to lose weight, that's very different than I want to lose 10 pounds before the end of the year. Okay, that's a specific amount in a specific time frame, and here he's giving us some of that. For example, develop a vaccine. Now we're in COVID-19 by the end of 2020. That's a goal, and it's got a deadline. Return to normal in 2021, and a variety of others. Refill stockpiles, deal with some of those issues. Third one, end our reliance on China. Bring back 1 million manufacturing jobs from China, as well as no federal contracts for companies who outsource to China, and just all sorts of things. Hold China fully accountable for allowing the virus to spread. He has a whole section on health care. The amount of misinformation on health care during this campaign is staggering, but nevertheless, here, for example, cover all pre-existing conditions. Of course, that's the president said that. Almost every one of these Republicans have, but the Democrats keep saying they want to get rid of pre-existing conditions. No, that isn't. Cut prescription drug prices. Well, some of that's already been done. Lower health care insurance premiums and surprise billing. Goes through a long, long list. Another one is education. Now, you would know this one if you watched the Republican National Convention, because almost all the time they talked about this issue of provide school choice to every child in America, teach American exceptionalism, a number of things like that. Then he has some that you have never seen in any agenda for any president. It's called Drain the Swamp. Now, the first one, pass congressional term limits. Not happening, sadly. That was part of the contract with America back in, 1994. Just didn't happen. We know the bottom line on that. Newt Gingrich tried to push it, but nevertheless, some of these others, they expose Washington's money trail, delegate powers back to the people, drain the globalist swamp by taking on international organizations. He's got quite a list there. Let's take a few more. Defend our police, fully fund and hire more police and law enforcement officers, bring violent extremist groups like Antifa to justice. Then he has a couple of others on illegal immigration and workers, block illegal immigrants from becoming eligible for taxpayer-funded programs, dismantle the human trafficking networks, the whole issue of ending sanctuary cities, a variety of others, and it goes on. Then he has one on innovate for the future, which I thought was kind of interesting because here the president has made a bigger deal out of the Space Force than probably any people in the media, maybe even other Republicans. But again, launch the Space Force, establish a permanent manned presence on the moon, send the first manned mission to Mars. Really kind of forward thinking. This is definitely has the touches of Donald Trump. Build the world's greatest infrastructure system. Yeah, that sounds kind of like him as well. Partner with other nations to clean up our planet's oceans, a variety of things in that regard. And then finally, he's got a whole section on America First foreign policy. Stop endless wars. Bring our troops home, because he wants to bring them home from Afghanistan, as you know. Get the allies to pay their fair share. He's talked about that. Wipe out the global terrorists who threaten to harm America. And then build a great I love every time I see the word great, you know that Donald Trump touched it. Build a great cybersecurity defense system and a missile defense system. Anyway, this goes on for a couple pages, and it's the second term agenda. And so a lot of people might say, well, what do you have planned? You've done all this in the first 3.5 years. Do you have any plans for the second year? And the answer is yes. And it goes on for me, at least 3 pages of material, and you can look it up. Now, the bottom line, of course, is that most people are pretty much convinced that Joe Biden's going to win, which is why you've had Robert Reich, who was the labor secretary under Bill Clinton, and a couple of other people as well, Chris Hayes at MSNBC, and even Kevin Baker writing in the New Republic, talking about this idea of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that is something that has been implemented in other countries. We've certainly seen that in South Africa after apartheid, and it was developed in Argentina and Bolivia and all the rest. And the argument basically is that this is a president that is, their argument, done so much damage that we're going to have to put together a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And it brings us to a very good question that people will be asking Joe Biden if he's elected. Because as Jim Garrity points out here, after Barack Obama became president and was elected president, while he was still the president-elect, there were all sorts of people that were actually in the Democratic Party calling for prosecutions of people in the Bush administration, George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, for alleged war crimes and the CIA's rendition program. And before he was sworn in, President-elect Obama indicated that he had no real interest in that. He said, we need to look forward as opposed to looking backward. But Joe Biden's going to face the same thing if indeed he's elected. Does he want to put Donald Trump in jail? Does he want to actually prosecute some of the questions that have been surfacing for some time? And it will be interesting to see, but they're talking about this Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Maybe we even have something that looks a little bit like the 9/11 Commission to go after Donald Trump. So we will see. But nevertheless, let me just mention before we take a break and we spend some time talking about Doubtless, that my commentary today is about the debate commission. And of course, Thursday we have our second presidential debate. It was supposed to be the third presidential debate. And my commentary here simply says, has the Commission on Presidential Debates been helpful? I don't think it has. And so I quote a little bit from a commentary by Newt Gingrich, just simply pointing that out and suggesting much better ways that we could have a good and maybe fruitful debate. Now, again, recognize that we have almost, 30 million people that have already voted before this second debate takes place. But nevertheless, I think in the future, we're going to have to seriously revamp the debate structure. And I give you 3, I think, concrete solutions and suggestions on how that takes place. So if you haven't gone to our website today, pointofview.net, go there and read the piece on the debate commission. Of course, if you already have signed up, you'll receive it in your inbox. Probably have already read it. Let's take a break. We're going to talk about doubt right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
You know, so often here on Point of View, we talk about theology and apologetics, really how to think about your Christian faith, how to defend your Christian faith. And one aspect of that is the subject of doubt, which is why I thought this would be a great book as we are, if we will, kind of concluding our conversation here today. It is a book called Doubtless, Because Faith is Hard. It's written by Shelby Abbott, and he is an author and campus minister with a crew. you, and an individual that has really had such a passion for university students. He's the author of Jacked, I Am a Tool to Help with Your Dating Life, Pressure Points, A Guide to Navigating Student Stress, and this one, Doubtless, Because Faith is Hard. And we have a link to his website, shelbyabbott.com, Aligning You with Christ, Connecting You with Culture. So, Shelby, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me, Kerby. I appreciate it.
A lot of misunderstanding about the subject of doubt, and the first one is that if you have doubt, that doesn't mean that you are a Christian with faith. You should just simply take it all by faith. And so, is it okay to have doubt?
Yeah, one of the things that I ran across is very prolific amongst a lot of people, young and old, that they're kind of afraid to have doubt, and that's one of the first ways that I address stuff at the beginning of the book is that not only is it common, but it's biblical. It's one of those things that we see examples in the scriptures all over the place of people doubting, and it's not something that we should hide from, that we should actually talk about it and do so in the context of community. It's a very normal part of the Christian faith.
I might just mention that you have 12 chapters in this very short book. It's a little over 100 pages, a section of 7 chapters on foundational doubts, and then section 2 on everyday doubts, and then a conclusion for further reading. It's written in such a way, first of all, that anybody can go through it individually, but I also like to mention, Shelby, that many of our listeners teach a Sunday school class, a Bible fellowship, a small group, and you always have at least 3 reflection questions at the end of each chapter. And the way you've put this together, if you are struggling with this issue, or if you know people that are, or if you want to do some teaching about this, this is just a perfect way to really cover some of this material in a small group setting, isn't it?
Yeah, I wrote it so that it can be an individual kind of personal study that you can do on your own, and then even jot down some answers to the reflection questions at the end in the actual book. But I also designed it so you can read it and kind of discuss it in a group, go through things together. And I'd actually very much encourage that, because one of the things I talk about in the book is to do so in the context of community, where you feel a safe atmosphere amongst other believers to ask questions and wrestle with things kind of corporately.
And I might just mention that it is endorsed by a number of people we've just interviewed with in the last month or two. Bob Lapine of Family Life Today. We just had Alyssa Childers on as we talked about her book, Another Gospel. I know Garrett Kell and a number of others. So it's kind of a who's who of people that have actually talked about this. But let's put doubt in some kind of context, because you point out that, first of all, doubt is common in the Psalms. How could you not see that? Because if you've spent any time at all in the Psalms, you can see that that is the case. Why are the evil thriving, and why are the good people suffering persecution? You think of doubt in terms of the New Testament, in terms of even John the Baptist. So you really help us understand that if you have doubt, you're in good company.
Yeah, I ran across this quote from a pastor who said that the Psalms, specifically the Psalms, give us permission to beat on God's chest. And I love that kind of visceral imagery that he came up with that, because if you read the Psalms, it really is like kind of this just very honest, real kind of, I don't understand what you're doing. I don't get it. Things are supposed to be a certain way according to you, but all evidence is to the contrary. There's just and that's the human emotional experience. You know, if you kind of look at the Psalms and say, where are they living? Typically, it's within the margins of what you would say a normal Christian is supposed to act like. They're either lamenting and very, very negative, or they're very, very positive and rejoicing. And so there's tons of examples there. And then, as you mentioned, in the New Testament, the kind of running one that I went with, obviously, Doubting Thomas is there, and I do get to him. But I thought John the Baptist was a great example, because he was the one who baptized Jesus and heard an audible voice from God that said, "This is my son," in that moment. And yet at the end of his life, John the Baptist asks Jesus kind of through his own disciples, "Hey, are you the one, or should we expect another?" And some people might read that and go, really? I mean, you heard the audible voice of God saying this was the one, yet you're still doubting? But I'm oddly comforted by that, because when I see that, I'm like, yeah, just as you said, I'm in good biblical company when I'm doubting, and God can take it.
And again, I love that example because, people doubting Thomas, he's probably always a skeptic, we know those kind of people. But John the Baptist, if Jesus had not come along, he would have been one of the great prophets, just like Elijah and things like that. So for him to have that, I think is helpful. But let's make a distinction between doubt and unbelief. Chapter 5, you talk about the roads to unbelief, because we do have, and you're well aware of this since you're on college campuses today, of a number of individuals that fit into the category of nones. That is, they believe in atheism, agnosticism, or no preference. And so we have a lot of individuals that are in the millennial generation or Generation Z that have unbelief, but that's different than doubt, isn't it?
It is, very much so. Doubt is not the same thing as unbelief. Just the same thing as temptation is not the same thing as sin. Temptation can lead to sin, of course, just like doubt can lead to unbelief, but to call them equal would be a very big mistake. Unbelief is an intentional decision that someone makes to believe, like, for example, that there is no God. That is a choice that someone makes, and they move from a specific column to another column. Doubt is a process that one can go through, that it helps you. It can, in many ways, strengthen your faith. And I'm very, very intentional about kind of describing the difference between the two and helping people to know that just because you're doubting doesn't mean you've made this choice to abandon the faith altogether. That's a very big mistake that we make, I think, in our minds and our hearts. And therefore, we run away from doubts, or if we're having doubts, we think we're in this gigantic crisis of faith. I kind of compare doubt to being like a house guest that comes over to your place. A house guest, when they come in, they sleep on the couch, they're in your bathroom, they're in your kitchen, they kind of mess things up. But then at the end of the weekend, they're meant to pack up their stuff and leave. It's not supposed to be a permanent thing that they stay. If they're pitching a tent in your living room, that's a problem. So there is a big distinction between wrestling with doubt and then celebrating our doubts. Because celebrating our doubts is saying, hey, go ahead and live here permanently. But we all know where that's going to lead eventually.
Yeah, and that's, of course, the path to unbelief. But back to that point of that can be a source of strength. We've had William Lane Craig on this program before, who I think you know, and he's argued that in some respects, if you have a question about Scripture, you have a doubt, investigate it, because what will happen is you'll find that there is an answer to it, and it will strengthen your faith. So it's just a really good argument. And the other part of that, when you talk about that on roads to unbelief, is you say sometimes people have what I might call, and you call, an unrealistic attitude about knowing everything concerning the Christian faith. This is one of the things, since you're with Crew, that you can be aware of. There are a lot of people that say, especially college students, well, I can't answer all the questions that I'm going to get when I go out witnessing, so I better not be engaged in evangelism because I need to know everything about everything before I can go share my faith. That's a false idea, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And I've been guilty of believing that in some of my younger years. But I mean, there's been plenty of examples in Scripture of people who come to faith and then immediately start talking to others about what they believe. I think that one of the major things that college students wrestle with is if they hear a question like from their professor or from a friend who's on their campus and they've never heard that question before, and they start to wonder, man, I don't know if it's ever been answered before. But one of the things I try to tell younger people, and what we could tell our kids too as they're growing up, is it's important to have your questions, but there's nothing new under the sun. Your questions have been someone else's questions for thousands of years. You've just got to be willing to put in the work to go find out where someone has actually written about it. And one of the examples that I use in there are these two college students who came to me and asked me a couple of questions. And I remember answering one and saying, well, that's actually been answered really nicely by Tim Keller in his book, Making Sense of God. And he goes, who's Tim Keller? And I was like, okay, come on. You got to be willing to do some work here. You can have questions, but let's not be lazy about it.
That's a good line. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about, well, why can we trust when we don't have all of the answers? And one of the chapters talks about it all hinges on that. Do we have a Bible that has validity and reliability? And then if it does, it tells us about the resurrection of Jesus. And if we have just those facts in our hands, it certainly gives us confidence to address the others. And then we'll get into a couple of those everyday doubts. But again, if you find yourself saying, ooh, this would be a book I'd like to read. This is a book I'd like to hand to my children, my grandchildren, a friend, neighbor, or maybe this would be something I'd like to do as a small group Bible study. We have, of course, linked to it on our website. We also, of course, have a link to shelbyabbott.com. You can find it there as well, and we'll be back right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Doubtless, because faith is hard, and we're talking with Shelby Abbott about this very important book that just came out. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about it, of course, we have a link to his website, and we have information about it, and get it in paperback or Kindle. But let's, if we can, talk about the foundation. Again, doubt is going to surface, but are there some foundational principles we can hold on to, rest our feet on, even in the midst of the doubt we're facing? And in chapter 7, you talk about this idea that we can actually trust in God's word, and we really can trust in the resurrection of Jesus. And once we have those foundational elements, then everything else can be something that we can build upon. True?
Yes, I believe that the resurrection is the greatest single piece of evidence for the validity of Christianity. So if Jesus Christ is dead right now, if his bones are buried somewhere in the Middle East, then our faith is not real. But if he's alive, that means that he predicted his own death and resurrection. Therefore, he holds the keys to life and death. Therefore, we can trust everything that he said about himself. and he often quoted the scriptures, the Old Testament. We can believe the Old Testament is true. If we believe that the Old Testament is true, that says that God created the world, and the dominoes just start to fall, if you kind of see the word picture there. So it really is all about investigating about whether or not Jesus is alive, and there is tons of amazing, credible, deep, thoughtful evidence for the fact that he is alive right now, that he is not dead.
And again, you've got some great quotes from N.T. Wright, who's been on with us quite often, and so you can use those and other things that are in that chapter. But just before we run out of time, let's, if we can, talk about everyday doubts. Really what you're doing there is helping us understand how to work through those. And the first point is your questions are important. And I might just for a minute speak to a number of pastors and Bible fellowship teachers and Sunday school teachers. We oftentimes do a mind games conference, and we talk about a mind games camp here on Point of View every year. We run into so many kids that say, I asked this question in my Sunday school class, and they said, well, I don't have an answer. Well, you shouldn't be worried about that anyway. And these really inquisitive young people say, well, I should be able to ask those questions. And even if you don't have an answer, I would hope that somebody could give me an answer to it. And we even encourage students to ask any question they've always wanted an answer to that they never have been able to receive an answer from in terms of their church. And so in some respects, Shelby, you're really saying it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to say, I really got some questions about this particular passage of Scripture or this particular theological issue, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, too, as like older people, we feel like we need to always have the right answer. If you're a parent, you're constantly in the position of trying to course correct and steer your children in the direction that is, most helpful that you believe. And therefore, when we do get a question that we don't know the answer to, we often try to fake it. And that's probably one of the worst things to do. If you fake it, or if you say, don't worry about that, it's not, you don't really need to worry about those kind of things. Those things are going to pop up again in the future. And we're seeing that right now with all these quote unquote celebrity Christians who are deconstructing their faith and being very public about that kind of stuff. If you sweep stuff under the rug, it will eventually come back and haunt you. And so a good answer to a question that you don't know what the answer is I don't know. Let's find out together.
Yes.
And you can go and find those things together with your Sunday school, your the people who you pastor, your kids, and anyone really.
And since I'm the old guy around the table here, let me just mention there was a time in which you had to go find that book by Josh McDowell, Norm Geisler, whoever it might be. And, of course, some of them actually have even passed on, like Norm Geisler. But the bottom line is now so many of those individuals also have websites, and there are all sorts of great YouTube videos. And, of course, this is kind of the heyday of apologetics. So if nothing else, the answers are out there, and it only takes a little bit of curiosity to find those, and that is so different than in my day where you had to find that particular book or call that particular person to try to resolve some of those questions. So much has changed just even in the last couple of years. But how do you work through your doubts? It seems to me that you have some real practical ways to do so, and this is, again, the value of the book, because you're not only just kind of raising the theological questions, you're really giving some people, if you will, some shoe leather on how to walk through some of these questions of doubt.
Yeah, I'm a super practical guy, and so I don't want to just live at the 30,000-foot level. There's a few practical strategies that give people at the end of the book. I can go through them real quick. One of them is practice thankfulness. If you're acting thankful for certain things and you're remembering what God has done for you, it's difficult to kind of stay and wallow in your doubts. I mentioned this before. Get with people, like real people and the right people to help you doubt well in the context of community. Continually remind yourself of the gospel. The gospel is not just something that we preach to non-believers. It's something that we need to preach to our own hearts as well, and remind ourselves of what God has done for us. And then I found, especially being in college ministry, one of the best ways to eliminate doubts from your heart is to share your faith. You'd be surprised about how quickly it's amazing as you're trying to teach someone what it is that you believe, that you're able to remind yourself freshly of what Jesus has done for you. Regardless of how the conversation might turn out, you can go, man, I just feel so alive right now. And the reason for that is because as a believer, that's what you're made for, is to share your faith.
So again, some great material there. Shelby Abbott with us. And again, we have a link to your website. As people go there, you've got some videos. You've got a number of blog posts and other resources. You've got some throwback questions to something you wrote about Furious 7 and all sorts of other issues that are posted there as well. So when people go there, they can find out more about you. They can find out about the book. And maybe if they want to connect up with you, they can do so. Of course, we have on our website the links to your website, Facebook page, Twitter page, but they can also, of course, find that on your website there as well. So some great resources. And if nothing else, you've written this, Shelby, as a way to help individuals that are maybe in some kind of ministry. It could be a campus ministry, church ministry. Take this and begin to minister to those individuals that are struggling with this issue of doubt.
Yeah, it's my prayer is really just to have influence. I didn't become a full-time missionary to be famous or to make money. I did it because God wanted to use me to influence other people, and so that's what I really want to do. I love it when I see someone influenced by the glory and the goodness of Scripture in God, and so that's really why I did it. So, yeah.
Again, aligning you with Christ and connecting you with culture. Shelby, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me, Kerby.
We are going to take a break, and let me just mention that tomorrow we're going to get into a couple of issues. You know, I was talking about what was going to happen later in the week, but I might as well mention that this time tomorrow we're going to be talking with Dr. Frank Wright about George Soros. We're not going to cut him off. You might have noticed that there was an interview a while back with Newt Gingrich was talking about George Soros, and as soon as he was talking about that, they cut him off at Fox News, which I thought was interesting. No, we're not going to cut him off. We're going to tell you about George Soros if you've always wanted to know some of the inside scoop. Matter of fact, they have this excellent booklet that I think you should know about, so you'll certainly benefit from that. Then I did mention that on Wednesday at this hour, we're going to be talking with our good friend Jay Richards about the whole issue of the pandemic and panic. And I think this is going to be an hour-long interview. It's going to take a while to kind of get into that. And then this time on Thursday, we'll be talking with our friend Dr. Doug Groteis about the whole issue of critical race theory. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, no issue is off the table here. We talk about a lot of pretty controversial issues, and during this last hour of Point of View each day, it seems like we've got a controversial issue, one right after the other. So if you find yourself saying, why don't they talk about those issues? We are. And so tomorrow, George Soros. Wednesday, we'll talk about the pandemic and some of the myths and misinformation about that. And then on Thursday, critical race theory. And then by the time we get to Friday, I got a feeling we have a few things to talk about because we will then have the presidential debate. Hope you'll tune in every single day. And if you would like more information, simply go to our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yeah, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.